The day they ripped the paper from my hands, the world seemed to tilt. I stood on the conference stage trembling as Dr. Marlowe, my mentor turned betrayer, read my name aloud, then turned to the audience and declared, "What we have here is nothing more than fanciful pseudoscience." The room erupted in snickers. My research on living pollution filters, plants engineered to soak up heavy metals, was reduced to a punchline. My colleague, the very person who had co-authored the paper, slipped the data into his own grant and walked off with my ideas. I felt the sting of every whispered embarrassment that had ever left my family's kitchen, now amplified 1,000-fold. The painful departure and relentless pursuit. I left the auditorium with my notebook clutched like a lifeline, the echo of my own name, Dr. Elena Varela, still ringing in my ears, distorted by mockery. The next morning I packed a single suitcase, said goodbye to the town that had raised me, and boarded a rust-stained bus to the desert research outpost where I could work in solitude. My family's words haunted me. "You'll never make a living from plants, you're wasting a good mind on fairy tales." Their doubts became the fuel for a fire I could not extinguish. I set up a modest greenhouse in a cracked, abandoned lot on the edge of the desert, surrounded by wind-blown dust and the skeletal remains of a former mining operation. The soil was poisoned, the air heavy with copper and lead. I planted the first batch of *salix* willows, genetically tweaked to hyper-accumulate heavy metals, and watched them wilt under the relentless sun. Night after night I measured, recorded, and adjusted. When the willows finally turned a vivid green, it wasn't just chlorophyll, it was proof that life could reclaim even the most poisoned ground. I sent my findings to journals, only to be rejected with the same dismissive tone I'd heard on that conference stage. I was laughed at in coffee shops, called a tree hugger by former classmates, and even my own sister sent a text that read, "Stop chasing fantasies, Elena. We need a real job." But each rejection sharpened my resolve. I built a portable living filter, a modular tower of moss, ferns, and my engineered willows, all fed by a simple drip system powered by solar panels. I tested it on a contaminated creek near the outpost. Within weeks, the water's metallic sheen faded, and fish began to dart beneath the surface again. The creek sang a new song, and I finally heard my own voice rise above the chorus of doubt. The arduous ascension and profound triumph. The breakthrough attracted the attention of a small, forward-thinking NGO focused on climate remediation. They offered me a grant, but with a condition. I had to prove the technology at scale. I took my living filters to a former industrial site in the Midwest, a scarred landscape where factories had once belched smoke and dumped waste for decades. The locals, farmers, teachers, retirees, looked at me like I was a circus act. "You think a tower of plants can clean this?" they asked, eyes narrowed. I set up 20 towers, each humming with the quiet work of roots pulling toxins from the soil. The first weeks were brutal. A freak storm knocked several towers over, and a batch of seedlings died from an unexpected fungal outbreak. I spent sleepless nights in a trailer, replanting, re-engineering, and re-talking to skeptical neighbors who whispered, "She'll never make it." Then the soil began to change. The once grey earth turned a richer brown and the air smelled faintly of pine. Crops planted nearby grew taller, their leaves greener. The community's children who had never seen a thriving garden gathered around the towers asking, "Can we have more?" The NGO's board called me in, eyes wide, and said, "We have a contract with the state to clean 3 more sites. You're the only one who can do it." Within 3 years, my living filters were deployed across 5 former mining towns, a coastal oil spill zone, and even a decommissioned landfill that had been a blight for generations. The technology was no longer a ridiculous dream, it was a cornerstone of national environmental policy. I was invited to speak at the United Nations, featured on the cover of Science Today *, and most importantly, I received a letter from the very colleague who had stolen my research, now pleading for a partnership. I declined, not out of spite, but because I had finally reclaimed my voice and my work. The cathartic return and poetic justice. 2 decades later, I received an invitation to my mother's 70th birthday dinner. The house was the same weathered farmhouse where I had first drawn leaf patterns on the kitchen table, and the same voices that once called my aspirations embarrassing would now hear the sound of my footsteps. I arrived with a modest suitcase, but under the passenger seat lay a sealed crate. Inside were 3 compact, self-sustaining living filters, each no larger than a garden shed, each humming with the quiet power of my research. As the family gathered around the long oak table, my mother, eyes watery, asked, "Elena, why are you back?" I placed the crate on the table, opened it and lifted the lid. A cascade of green unfurled. Mosses brushed against the wood, ferns unfurled their fronds, and a small willow branch swayed gently, its leaves catching the late afternoon light. I turned the faucet on the side of the unit. Water trickled through the roots, emerging crystal clear. "My father's old well has been dry for years," my uncle muttered, "and the soil is still black with chemicals." I connected the filter to the well's pipe. Within minutes, the water turned from a murky brown to a bright, clean stream. The family stared, mouths open, as the first sip of fresh water was taken by my youngest cousin, who giggled, "It tastes like rain." My aunt, who had once told me, "You'll never feed a family with plants," whispered I was wrong. My mother, tears now streaming down her cheeks, reached across the table, clasped my hand and said, "You were never an embarrassment. You were a seed we didn't understand." The room fell silent, the weight of years of doubt lifting like a fog. My brother, who had always taken the pragmatic route in the family business, stood, his voice steady. "Elena, you've turned our broken land into hope. Let us help you bring this to the rest of the county." Later that night, as the fire crackled and the stars blinked above the old barn, I reflected on the journey. The betrayal, the ridicule, the sleepless nights, all had been the crucible that forged my purpose. The living filters were more than technology. They were proof that perseverance can rewrite destiny, that the soil of our past can be healed, and that the voice we lose to mockery can return louder than ever. I looked at my family, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of the lantern, and felt a profound gratitude, not for the success itself, but for the chance to show that a dream once deemed ridiculous can become the very lifeline of a community. The ledger of karma had balanced, not with vengeance but with renewal. As I tucked the last of the filters into the barn for the winter, I whispered to the night, "We are all seedlings waiting for the right soil." And in that moment, I knew the story was not just mine, it was a reminder to anyone who has ever been told they would fail. Plant your belief deep, water it with resolve, and watch the world bend toward the light.